We're going to be in the book of Proverbs in just a minute, although I'll admit we're going to bounce around a lot, so it might be hard to follow. But we'll read a lot of chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, and hopefully chapter 9, or as much as we can. Before we get started this morning, let's pray. God, we come to you now, and we thank you for a beautiful day. Thank you for the chance to be together as brothers and sisters in Christ. This truly is the day that the Lord has made, and we will rejoice and be glad in it. Bless us now, Father, as we look into your word and we seek wisdom. And Father, I pray that you'll help us to see, first and foremost, the wisdom in being disciples of Jesus. So bless us, Father, through your Holy Spirit, that we can be more like him. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. So we just finished up our study of the minor prophets, and over the next few weeks, what I'd like to do is go through the wisdom literature with you. Now, by wisdom literature, usually what we mean in the Old Testament is Job, Proverbs, and Ecclesiastes, and I'll do a little more introduction about that in a minute. So that's what we're going to do over the next few weeks. I am scheduled to teach in a different class next quarter, so at the end of this quarter, there will be a new teacher. I don't know who that will be. So for the rest of this quarter, which I think is the rest of October and then November, is that right? Anybody know? Steve Law says yes? Okay. Anyway, I think we'll be doing this for about 2 months, roughly. But we'll see, okay? The book of Proverbs and Ecclesiastes and Job are all really rich books, and we could spend a lot more than 2 months studying them if need be. But we typically group these books together as part of wisdom literature that is common not just to Israel. So in the ancient Near East, that's what we refer to that time period, biblical time period, and the nations that surrounded Israel, the nations some of which you read about in the Bible, like Egypt, for instance, they had traditions of wisdom as well. So the idea was to give practical answers to somebody, all right? It wasn't necessarily to the common man. Sometimes it was, sometimes it wasn't. But instead, it was just about how to have your best life, okay? And again, this wasn't unique to Israel. In fact, I'm going to show you some Egyptian proverbs in just a moment. So the Hebrew wisdom literature of the Old Testament includes the books of Job, Proverbs, and Ecclesiastes. A lot of times you'll see the Song of Songs or the Song of Solomon thrown in there. And then sometimes Psalms, and it's definitely true that some of the book of Psalms is wisdom literature, but it also is clearly more of a hymn book, more of a praise book with some wisdom literature in it. If you have a Catholic Bible, then you'll also see some books in there that we don't have in our Protestant Bibles, and books like Ecclesiasticus or Sirach, called the Wisdom of Solomon, also fit in that general category. So it indicates a couple of things. One, the people of Israel were like their neighbors, and really like every culture of all time, which is they like to collect wisdom. And they like to have a way to pass on from one generation to another generation the things that lead to a good life. But secondly, that especially among the Jews, they had their own traditions and ways of doing this, and Solomon is the big name there. Of course, there's wisdom all over the Bible, and oftentimes the book of James is grouped together with wisdom literature, and it's in the New Testament. The word for wisdom in Hebrew is chokmah, and it's the kind of thing where wisdom is a good translation, but it doesn't exactly get at all that wisdom entails. So it generally means skill or ability or craftsmanship or cunning, but think of it as this. Think of being skilled at life. When I think of the wise people I've known in my life, and I think of the smart people I've known in my life, they're not the same people. Some people are smart and wise, but the truth is, some of the least educated people I've ever known are some of the wisest people I've ever known. So the beauty of wisdom is that you don't have to get advanced degrees to have it. Also, you don't necessarily get it with advanced degrees or being an expert in a certain field. So, being skilled at life. What's unique about the wisdom literature, and again we're talking specifically about Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Job is that they don't make any reference to the things we expect the Old Testament to talk about. It doesn't talk about Moses or the law of Moses. It doesn't talk about Israel's great history. Doesn't talk about the prophets. Instead, it's more about observation. So the basis of wisdom is not special revelation, but observation. What we mean by that is you don't need a prophet to tell you the wise things that you read in Proverbs. In fact, what you'll see is that the wisdom in the book of Proverbs is oftentimes mirrored in cultures throughout the world, in the ancient world and the modern world. It's good stuff to live by. And in some sense, it's not worried about the hereafter, it's worried about the here and now. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that it's not pointing towards eternity, because all the Bible does that. But the book of Proverbs specifically is looking at what's happening here and now, how to live a good life right now, how to have a blessed life right now. Wisdom is based on observation and experience. You see something over and over and over again, and you think, I'm not going to repeat that mistake again, or this works, I'm going to do it this way. So it really hits at the fact that there's a kind of an order to the world, kind of some set laws that are always going to be true whether we like them or not about life. And so if God ordered creation in such a way that it always works in one direction, then it makes sense we want to know about those things and do them, right? It's important to understand that there's a law of gravity and that it always works. If you don't understand that, according to the Bible, you're a fool, which is the opposite of being wise. But it means you're going to pay for it, right? If you don't understand the principle of gravity. You don't need an advanced degree in physics to understand the concept of gravity. What goes up must come down, right? The bigger they are, the harder they fall. That kind of stuff. Gravity does not care about our feelings. So, God has so ordered the world that the way human societies are going to work, the way that human beings are going to work, is pretty universal, and at the same time, always has enough variation to keep things spicy. So it's important to note whenever we're reading Proverbs specifically, it's about principles for life. Don't see it as always hard and fast rules, because you will be able to think of exceptions to a lot of the Proverbs that you read. The point isn't that there's never an exception to it, but the point is, are you going to live by these principles? So, I told you I'd share with you some Egyptian wisdom literature. I'll do that in just a moment. But before I do that, let me just preface the idea of the wisdom literature, and specifically the book of Proverbs, this way. In some sense, you could define the foolishness of the book of Proverbs, or the folly is foolishness, as simply being prideful. Now, I know that might not seem like a natural thing, but in many ways, according to the book of Proverbs, to be a fool, now foolishness is defined differently biblically than it would necessarily in day-to-day language, but to be a fool is to decide that the rules don't apply to you. To decide that you can play with fire and not get burned. And I think about times in my life when, for one reason or the other, I decided that, that the rule of gravity doesn't apply to me. All right, now, surely nobody else can relate to it, but I'm going to go ahead and confess this. A few times in my life, I've been known to go over the speed limit. Okay? Just a few. And in even fewer times than I've gone over the speed limit, someone has noticed, an authority figure maybe, an officer of the law. And for some reason, they feel the need to point it out to me, okay? And it's really interesting to me what my initial instinct, especially when I was younger, my initial instinct was, or is. First thing I want to do is defend myself. Speed limit, 55, I'm going 65. I know I was doing it, okay? I know that I was going over that speed limit, but immediately my mind is going to try to put blame somewhere else. Either, well, why is the speed limit that here anyway? It doesn't make any sense. Or this is just a speed trap. Or there's nobody else around. It's not dangerous. I know none of you have done this kind of thing, right? But what am I really saying? These rules don't apply to me. I know better than whoever decided what the speed limit here is. And when we are in the position where we say, this is the wise thing that we as a collective maybe have decided, but I know better, that's pride. And it leads to ruin in many cases. One other little story, and then we'll look at this. I didn't know where to fit it in today, but I feel like I need to tell it. So a few years ago, I was in Mary's hometown in Columbia, Tennessee, and I like to run. You know, I'm not a good runner, but I run a lot. And I was out running at a track there, and I didn't bring any water, so I stopped at a gas station to get some water when I was done. And I went in, and I was thinking about how much I'm overpaying for this thing. And then a lady walks in. And let's just say that my initial impression of this lady is that she probably is not in the upper income quartile. Okay? There are certain reasons why I look at her and go, she probably doesn't have a whole lot of money. Don't know that for a fact. And as I'm standing there with my bottled water, she looks at me. Well, first of all, she spoke to the guy behind the counter, and then she looked at me. And she asked for some kind of lottery ticket, okay? And I'll be honest with you, I don't know what it was, but she wanted to buy every single one that he had, okay? Now, I don't know the differences between them. I couldn't even begin to guess how much it was worth or anything like that. But this is what she said. She turned to me, and she said, you can't find these hardly anywhere. I've been to every gas station between here and Giles County, which is south of Murray County where Columbia is, and bought up every one of these I could. Okay? Now, I'm not telling this to make fun of the lady, but a couple of things hit me. One is, in addition to teaching Bible, I teach math. And you've probably heard this before, but a lottery is a tax on the mathematically challenged. Okay, so immediately I think, that's just a bad math decision. But more than that, some sadness hit me because, again, I could tell this lady probably doesn't have a whole lot of money. And I understand the impulse to say, look, one right number or one right card, and my destiny changes, that thought. And there are a lot of poor people who think that way. And I'm not trying to make fun of them. But I know this from life experience, from listening to wise people, which is, I don't know how much money she was spending that day on lottery tickets. Let's just go out on a limb and say that she was spending $50 that day. But if she's in the habit of going and buying up every one of these, I'm going to guess that this is a fairly regular thing that she does. So let's do a little thought experiment. I ran the math this morning, okay? So I know my math is good on this. Let's say you're the kind of person that thinks, you know what? One day I'm going to hit it big, and so I'm going to keep buying lottery tickets until I finally hit it big. Eventually the numbers are going to be on my side. Well, mathematically, you're never going to win, okay? Or you're never going to win the big thing. I know, you spend $100, you might win $5 or $10 worth here or there. I know that kind of thing happens. But if, let's say you spent $50 a month on lottery tickets, but instead of doing the lottery ticket thing, you just take your $50 and every month you put it in a retirement account or an investment account. And let's say you did that for 25 years. Okay, so every month you're doing $50, only $50. So that's $600 a year, right? Do that for 25 years. Now, assuming that the stock market, by the stock market I mean the Dow Jones Industrial Average, does what it does on average, okay? And I realize it goes up and down, and there are no guarantees in life, okay? You can't come to me for those kind of guarantees. Book of Proverbs can't give them to you. However, I can say this. You can buy as many lottery tickets as you want to buy, and you're not going to win big. However, if you just took that $50 a month and invested it for 25 years, that's $50 gone. If your money appreciated at 8% a year, which is what the Dow Jones does on average, over the 25 years, then you would have close to $50,000. But if you're the kind of person that's buying up lots of lottery tickets, and let's say you did $100 a month, you'd have more like $90,000. And not guaranteed, but close to it. And even if not guaranteed, some money at the end of it, right? Now, why do I point that out? Again, not to shame her, but just to say, here is one way where there is clear wisdom and there is clear foolishness. I'm not trying to guilt everybody for ever buying a lottery ticket, by the way, okay? I'm not trying to judge you and send your soul to hell or anything like that. But if your retirement is depending on you buying lottery tickets, you need to question that decision. There are better ways to invest your money with much greater chances. Now, I point this out just to say that's the way life is. Very few guarantees. But there are a lot of people who know a lot more than I do who tell me that, look, you're going to do better if you invest smaller amounts of money over a longer period of time than if you spend it all right now, or you're always borrowing money, that kind of thing. I mean, it works that way. And none of us can change that fact, okay? No matter how hard I shake my fist and say, it'll be different for me, there are ways that the world works. And the wisdom literature is a way to kind of shine a light on that and say, if you want to be a wise person, you got to make good decisions. And the scriptures are going to tell you how to do that. Now, as I said before, wisdom literature was common in the ancient Near East. And I wanted to mention specifically the instruction of Amenemope. Man, I promise I practiced. Amenemope. This guy. All right, I'm just going to refer to the instructions, Egyptian instructions. So he was a wise man who collected lots of sayings. And we know that different Egyptian pharaohs were known for their wisdom. In fact, in the ancient Near East, it's common for kings and wisdom to be associated with each other, much like wisdom and Solomon are associated. And in the Egyptian instructions, what you'll notice is there's a lot of similarity with especially Proverbs 22 and 23, but in general, the whole idea of Proverbs. Now, I'm not suggesting to you that Proverbs borrowed from this. Instead, I want you to see there's kind of a shared wisdom tradition throughout the ancient Near East, and so people tended to think some similar things. So Proverbs 22, 17 through 19 says, "Incline your ear and hear the words of the wise, and apply your heart to my knowledge. For it will be pleasant if you keep them within you, if all of them are ready on your lips, that your trust may be in the Lord. I have made them known to you today, even to you." And chapter 1 of the Egyptian instructions say, "Give your ears," that should say ears, my typo. "Give your ears and hear what is said. Give your mind over to their interpretation. It is profitable to put them in your heart, but woe to him that neglects them. Let them rest in the shrine of your insides, that they may act as a lock in your heart. Now when there comes a storm of words, there will be a mooring post on your tongue." And then in verse 20 of Proverbs 22, "Have I not written for you 30 sayings of counsel and knowledge to make you know what is right and true, that you may give a true answer to those who sent you?" And chapter 30 of the Egyptians says, "Mark for yourself these 30 chapters. They please, they instruct, they are foremost of all books. They teach the ignorant. If they are read to an ignorant man, he will be purified through them. Seize them, put them in your mind." So you see a lot of idea about do what you can to get this wisdom. It'll benefit you in life. And then Proverbs 22:22, "Do not rob the poor because he is poor, or crush the afflicted at the gate." Whereas the Egyptian instructions say, "Guard yourself from robbing the poor, from being violent to the weak." So you see some similar things going on. There's some general wisdom that says if you're going to be a good Egyptian, if you're going to be a good Israelite, there are certain ways you need to go about life. Again, the focus tends to be on this side of heaven. Not that it doesn't affect the other side of heaven, but I'm just saying about how to live a practical life. Now, I chose this on purpose because I wanted to show you something. I know occasionally, at least I have some students who like to really nerd out on things, and so this is a nerd out moment where we're really going to focus on something that isn't of great importance but might be of great interest. So, Proverbs 22:20 has puzzled Bible translators for a long time. It's kind of got a weird word in there, and they're not sure what to do with it. And the Egyptian instructions were discovered in the 1880s, and they're kept in the British Library, and they were finally translated into modern languages in the 1920s. And all of a sudden, people are starting to see comparisons to the book of Proverbs. And there was one scholar named Adolf Ehrman, And as he was studying them, he's an expert on hieroglyphics and on Hebrew and everything. He figured out, or at least he claimed to figure out, how to translate Proverbs 22:20 from this part of the Egyptian instructions. Okay, similar kind of teachings. And it's the idea of these 30 things. And so it made more sense, the way it read in Hebrew, is if the word for 30 and the word that's translated differently, real similar. And he said, this is what was originally meant. And so what's interesting is you can see different Bible translations have said, he was right. So now you'll see that Proverbs 22:20, some of them will talk about 30 sayings. But some of them won't. Some of them are going to say, no, he was wrong. Let me show you. So the NIV, have I not written 30 sayings? New Living, 30 sayings. English Standard Version, have I not written for you 30 sayings? But the King James came along long before we discovered the Egyptian instructions. Have not I written to thee excellent things? New King James, excellent things. New American Standard, excellent things. So you see, some translations are saying no, that the Egyptian instructions didn't tell us anything, and we're still going to kind of try to handle this weird word this way by translating excellent things. Now, it doesn't matter a whole lot, I'll be honest with you, but it's very interesting to me that maybe some archaeology there and some knowledge of Egypt helped us understand the Bible better. Maybe it didn't. But at least that'll explain to you why there are different translations of Proverbs 22:20. So we typically associate Solomon with all three books, right? With Proverbs, I shouldn't say with all three books, but with two books, Proverbs and Ecclesiastes. The book of Job, we don't associate with Solomon. And it makes a lot of sense that the wisdom literature of the Old Testament would be associated with Solomon because of the things the Bible says about Solomon and his wisdom. Best example is here in 1 Kings 4:29 and following. God gave Solomon wisdom and very great insight, and a breadth of understanding as measureless as the sand on the seashore. Solomon's wisdom was greater than wisdom of all the people of the East, and greater than all the wisdom of Egypt. He was wiser than anyone else, including Ethan the Ezrahite, wiser than Heman, Calcol, and Darda, the sons of Mahol, and his fame spread to all the surrounding nations. He spoke 3,000 proverbs, and his songs numbered 1,005. He spoke about plant life, from the cedar of Lebanon to the hyssop that grows out of walls. He also spoke about animals and birds, reptiles and fish. So Solomon was known for his great wisdom, not just in Israel, but throughout all the neighboring countries. And he didn't just give religious teaching. I mean, it was about all kinds of things, plant life and animal life. He was a wise man. Now, it should be noted, if you know the story of Solomon, he didn't always make wise decisions, did he? So he was a great collector of wisdom, and he made great decisions, but ultimately, even in his own life, he turned from God. So that's a good reminder to us that we have to constantly be on watch of whether or not we become victims of foolishness. So when we look at Proverbs, I'll do a little bit of the outline and everything, but I want to show you a few things you might have missed. So what I wouldn't say is that Solomon wrote the book of Proverbs. And the reason is because the book of Proverbs tells us clearly that he didn't write all of Proverbs. But also it's clear that he was a major influencer of it. So there's evidence of 8 earlier collections. And what I mean by that, it's clear that at least 8 different pieces have been put together. Now let me show you why we know that. So Proverbs 1:1 begins the Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel. Okay? Now, if it all were just one collection, it should just kind of go on from there. But then in chapter 10, verse 1, it says the Proverbs of Solomon. It's kind of introducing a new thing, which is really the same thing. The Proverbs of Solomon, a wise man makes a glad father, but a foolish son is the sorrow to his mother. Then Proverbs 22:17, we read just a moment ago. Incline your ear and hear the words of the wise, and apply your heart to my knowledge. So this words of the wise seem to be indicating that it's more general wisdom, not necessarily from Solomon. Then in chapter 24, verse 23, these also are sayings of the wise. Again, more sayings from wise people. Check this one out, Proverbs 25:1. These also are Proverbs of Solomon, which the men of Hezekiah, king of Judah, copied. All right, so now we say these are coming from Solomon, but it's not until Hezekiah's time that they are being written down. You might remember I used this timeline in our study of the minor prophets, but I like it because it has the kings of Israel and Judah on it. And so here we have Solomon right here in the 10th century BC. You see where Hezekiah is? Over here in the 8th century. So it's a couple hundred years at least between when Solomon gave these Proverbs and they were being copied in Proverbs 25:1. Okay, so this hints at not just the fact that Solomon was wise, but he developed a wisdom tradition, or you might even say a school of wisdom, so that there were people who were devoted to copying and sharing and teaching Solomon's wisdom for generations. We know that the Egyptians did things like that. They had their wise men in their schools, and it seems that probably the people of Israel did too. And Solomon, again, was the great wise man. But we also have Proverbs 31, the words of Agar, son of Jekah. So clearly not all of the book is attributed to Solomon. And then Proverbs 31:1, the words of King Lemuel, an oracle that his mother taught him. And then the eighth one would be, the Proverbs 31 woman at the end, which seems to be even yet another bit of wisdom that's added. So this is wisdom collected from different Jewish sources, we'll say, back in Old Testament times. We are going to read directly from the book of Proverbs, but I just want to talk a little bit about what you find there. So the book of Proverbs tells us about wisdom's advice on the way to success. That hard work, discipline, study, piety or holiness, good manners, careful use of language, sexual propriety, all of those things pay off. All of those things are good things in and of themselves, and they will result in a better life. Even if there's a little pain now or a little self-denial now, it will be better for you to work hard, to be disciplined, to be sexually pure. And so you see lots of contrasts. For instance, Proverbs 2, verses 20 through 22 talk about the way of the upright versus the way of the wicked. So there's a lot of contrasting imagery to say, this is how you know the bad thing, this is how you know the good thing. Do the good thing, all right? But it's not always that simple. I meant to have, and I didn't put on there, Proverbs 6, where it talks about going to the ant. Go to the ant, you sluggard, it says in the NIV. You lazy bones, I think another translation says. What does the ant do? The ant, he's working hard and he's putting up for the winter, right? He's going to make sure that when the bad time comes, he is ready to endure it. That's what ants do. You should do the same thing. If you're lazy right now, later on you're going to starve to death, or later on you're going to freeze. That kind of idea. Which, by the way, since I mentioned investing a moment ago, I'm not some expert on it and I'm not trying to sell you anything, but I've definitely heard Christians, kind of deal with the struggle of, on the one hand, do I trust God for my future? On the other hand, should I have a retirement account, or should I, invest for long in the future? Because you definitely have the Bible teaching, look, trust God in the here and now and don't worry about the future. And at the same time, you have the biblical teaching like going to the ant and seeing how he saves up for later to take care of himself. So we don't want to be so greedy that what we're really trying to do is acquire so much wealth that we'll never have to worry about anything. But also, we don't want to be so foolish as to act like we're not responsible for taking care of ourselves in the future. Hard work now pays off later. Proverbs teaches that. Lots of language about sexual fidelity, being faithful in your marital relationships. We're going to look at some of those verses. And let's just look down here, number 5 here, the personification of wisdom. So Proverbs does a really interesting thing, is that it presents you with two women. Often they're referred to as Lady Wisdom versus Dame or Madam Folly. And it is helpful to see this. The book of Proverbs is for all of us, but it tends to approach the subject of life as a father teaching a son, sometimes a king teaching a prince. But still, its language is going to be aimed at how do you help a young man stay out of the ditches in life? And so that's the language that's going to be used. And if you realize that's the approach that it's taken, then it makes sense that you want to tell a young man, look, you've got two women calling out to you. And they both have their arguments for why you should follow them. You pick Lady Wisdom. Don't follow Madam Folly. Okay, so that's the imagery that's being there. But what you're going to have to do is, especially if you're a female, you're going to have to find a way to apply that language over to something, in your own life. So, well, let's wait till we get to Proverbs Chapter 9, and then I'll talk more about this. But just realize it's written usually from the perspective of a father speaking to his son. Sometimes the father will say, now remember the words of your mother. Okay, so it's not just the advice of a father, but that's typically the way that Proverbs approaches the subject. So just a very brief outline of the book of Proverbs. Chapters 1 through 9 focuses on wisdom versus folly, and specifically Lady Wisdom versus Dame Folly. And then we get the Proverbs of Solomon written and put in order by himself, chapters 10 through 24, and then the ones set in order by the men of Hezekiah, chapters 25 through 29, then the Oracle of Agar, and the Proverbs of a Mother to Lemuel. Again, just a very general outline. So that gets us into Proverbs chapter 1. We're not going to read the whole book of Proverbs, not today or not in all of it, but we will hit some of the high points, especially in the first few chapters. So Proverbs 1:1. The Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel, for gaining wisdom and instruction, for understanding the words of insight, for receiving instruction in prudent behavior, doing what is right and just and fair, for giving prudence to those who are simple, knowledge and discretion to the young. Let the wise listen and add to their learning. Let the discerning get guidance. For understanding proverbs and parables, the sayings and riddles of the wise. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. So again, these are the wise words of Solomon, and it's all about gaining wisdom. So the book over and over again is going to plead with us. View yourself as someone who is seeking treasure. You're a treasure hunter. But the treasure that you want more than anything is wisdom. You're going to go around collecting it as much as you can, wherever you can. Be someone who gladly accepts wisdom. There's lots of foolishness or lots of folly out there, and it's being sold, and it's cheap. You be a collector of wisdom, and if it takes everything you've got, buy it, because it's the most important thing. Notice some of the language. It talks about proverbs and parables and sayings and riddles. That's definitely true in the book of Proverbs. Some of the proverbs are really sober, some are kind of silly, some are funny. It's got all kinds of wisdom in it. I would note this, and you've probably noticed this before, maybe even heard about it, which is that many times in the Bible, especially in the Old Testament, a Hebrew way of communicating things or teaching things is through what's called parallelism. So oftentimes the Bible will say something and then it'll say something right below it, so right after it. So it's pretty much the same thing in different words. So you have parallel thoughts. For gaining wisdom and instruction, for understanding words of insight. It's basically the same thing, right? For receiving instruction in prudent behavior, doing what is right and just and fair. Again, basically the same thing. It's just a common Hebrew way of teaching. It makes things easier to remember and to recite out loud, which is almost certainly what these people would have been doing. And then we have in verse 7 a concept that comes up over and over and over again in the book of Proverbs. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Later he'll say the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. So the truth of the matter is this. If you don't fear the Lord, there is going to be an absolute ceiling on how much wisdom you can have in this life. I mean, you can have some wisdom, there's no doubt about it. But the fear of the Lord really is where wisdom starts. So if you have a fear of the Lord, you're already like 90% of the way there. Now you're ready just to add on to the fear of the Lord. And by fear, of course, we don't just mean being scared of God, but having a holy respect, a serious faith in God, that He is, and that He is a rewarder of those who diligently seek Him, as it says in Hebrews. Let's continue on in chapter 1. Listen, my son, to your father's instruction. Do not forsake your mother's teaching. They are garland to grace your head and a chain to adorn your neck. My son, if sinful men entice you, do not give in to them. If they say, come along with us, let's lie in wait for innocent blood. Let's ambush some harmless soul. Let's swallow them alive like the grave and whole like those who go down to the pit. We will get all sorts of valuable things and fill our houses with plunder. Cast lots with us. We will all share the loot. So this is obviously talking about if criminals are asking you to come in and join in their band, and so you can take advantage of people and rob them. I don't know if they're going to say it this way, hey, come along with us while we spill blood. But that's the idea. That's really what they're saying, isn't it? Hey, I got a way to make some money. Nobody will know. And they might not be saying what it all entails out loud, but that's really what they're doing. Okay, so don't listen to them, he says. My son, do not go along with them. Do not set foot on their paths, for their feet rush into evil. They are swift to shed blood. How useless to spread a net where every bird can see it. These men lie in wait for their own blood. They ambush only themselves. Such are the paths of all who go after ill-gotten gain. It takes away the life of those who get it. So, there's how many TV shows have there been over the years devoted to stupid criminals? Right? And probably some of us take a pleasure in watching somebody else make a fool out of themselves, because they think they can break the law and that kind of thing. But it also it's just a testimony to exactly what Proverbs says. If you think you set a snare, it's not going to catch you. Those criminals, more than anything else, are prideful that they won't get caught, right? That the rules that apply to all of us don't apply to them. But we know it's not just the criminals. It's not just the people who are embarrassed on TV about it, who get their mugshots. How many times have you seen your own conceit, your own self-centeredness, your own selfishness come back and bite you? Think about the times when I've been smallest in life and how it never paid off. The sleepless nights I get because I said something I shouldn't have said, or I did something I shouldn't have done. The relationships that suffer because we think we can get away with evil. So, the Solomon's saying, pay attention to the long-term effects. Now, remember I talked about Lady Wisdom? You start to see her in verse 20, more explicitly in chapter 9, but you start to see her in verse 20 of chapter 1. Out in the open, wisdom calls aloud. Notice, she raises her voice in the public square. So you've got a woman who's calling out. On top of the wall, she cries out. At the city gate, she makes her speech. How long will you who are simple love your simple ways? How long will you mockers delight in mockery and fools hate knowledge? Repent at my rebuke. Then I will pour out my thoughts to you. I will make known to you my teachings. And so what Lady Wisdom says is, do you want to live a long life? Do what I say. Do you want to have enough money? Do what I say. Do you want to avoid pain? Do what I say. So chapter 9 is where you have it more explicitly said about this Lady Wisdom. Verse 1, wisdom has built her house. She has set up its 7 pillars. She has prepared her meat and mixed her wine. She has also set her table. She has sent out her servants, and she calls from the highest point of the city, let all who are simple come to my house. To those who have no sense, she says, come, eat my food and drink the wine I have mixed. Leave your simple ways, and you will live. Walk in the way of insight. Whoever corrects a mocker invites insults. Whoever rebukes the wicked incurs abuse. Do not rebuke mockers, or they will hate you. Rebuke the wise, and they will love you. Instruct the wise, and they will be wiser still. Teach the righteous, and they will add to their learning. So on the one hand, you have kind of a simplistic metaphor of this woman who is wisdom calling out, come eat at my table. Look, I've got this great feast for you. But it's clear we're not really talking about a woman, and we're not really talking about food. What we're really talking about are good principles to live by. And so immediately we get into Proverbs. So one proverb is, whoever corrects a mocker invites insults. So I'm not a comedian. You know that? But I have seen comedians have to deal with hecklers before. And I know if I were a comedian and I was trying to be funny, and somebody started lambasting me from the cheap seats, it would absolutely wreck me. I would not know what to do. And, some comedians know what to do with that kind of person, but in general, it's going to knock them off. And that's because you can't deal with people like that. People who are mockers, it's better off just to say nothing at all. Because you're going to turn out being a fool too if you respond to them. That's kind of the wisdom there. Now, of course, sometimes you have to tell off somebody if they're doing the wrong thing. Sometimes you have to. But in general, leave it be. Your little speech is not going to change them. All right, that's how many times in life you just got to let it go. Solomon didn't know about social media, but if he did, you're scrolling along and you see something that you know is wrong. So easy to be drawn into it. Try to correct it, that kind of thing. Usually, if you do that, people are just going to hate you even more, he says. Now, wise people, on the other hand, wise people will listen. If you know someone's wise and you know they're in the wrong, correct them. They'll appreciate it. Proverbs says, wounds from a friend can be trusted, but an enemy multiplies kisses. So somebody who really loves you and you really respect, if they rebuke you, listen to them. They know what they're talking about. So this is Lady Wisdom, and she's calling out, offering up her wisdom. We got about one more minute. Let's talk about Dame Folly or Madam Folly. Folly is an unruly woman. She is simple and knows nothing. She sits at the door of her house on a seat at the highest point of the city, calling out to those who pass by, who go straight on their way. Let all who are simple come to my house. To those who have no sense, she says, stolen water is sweet. Food eaten in secret is delicious. But little do they know that the dead are there, that her guests are deep in the realm of the dead. So you see, we're talking about this loose woman who's inviting you into her home. Remember, Dame Folly had this feast laid out for you, this feast of wisdom. That was Lady Wisdom. Whereas Dame Folly, she's got these succulent treats. She says, it's even better if nobody else knows. You can see the double meaning here, can't you? The book of Proverbs will be very explicit sometimes about the nature of sexuality and how young men can be lured into things. But the book of Proverbs isn't just about the sexual sin. It's about the appeal of the foolishness, an appeal of a sinful heart. And so it's about sex, but it's about a lot more than sex. Okay, so it's part of the beauty of the wisdom of the book of Proverbs. So as I finish up, I almost did this, and then I thought better of it. I think wisdom prevailed in this. But I was thinking, hey, what if we had some imagery to reflect Lady Wisdom and Dame Folly, okay? And I was like, who could I use for this? And a funny thought came to my head, and I might get in trouble for this, okay? But my first thought was Dolly Parton. Now I realize Dolly Parton, she's been called the patron saint of the state of Tennessee, and now everybody loves Dolly Parton, right? She's just a really good person, and we're proud of her, all that kind of thing. But I just remembered a little bit, okay? When I was younger, and when people thought about Dolly Parton, they didn't think about wholesome goodness all the time. And so in the process of me confirming my facts about Dolly Parton, I discovered what I didn't know. It happened when I was 4 years old. Dolly Parton was on the cover of Playboy magazine. That's our patron saint. Now, am I trying to dog her? No, like I said, we all love her. She does great things. So what I thought about doing was having young Dolly Parton as Dame Folly. And then about old Dolly Parton being Lady Wisdom, okay? My guess is, like a lot of us, as she's gotten older, she's gotten a lot wiser in that. And she appears to. Then I also thought, well, if I'm going to do that about the women, the two women, should I do two men? And so I was trying to decide what two men would be calling out to you. And I thought about the age group that I'd be talking to here. Who are the men that I would pick that you would say, one represents the wise man and one represents the sexy, sinful man. And I just thought better of that totally, okay? I don't know from your generation who those people would be. But take it and apply it however you need to say this. There's a big message out there that advertises foolishness. God's saying, listen to my wisdom. That's what the wisdom literature is all about. So, Lord willing, next week we'll finish up the book of Proverbs and get on into the book of Job. Thanks so much for your attention. You're dismissed.